Welcome to New America 2045. My name is Mark Miller. I'm a retired teacher and a writer. And I want to wish everyone a happy new year. I do realize the year 2022. So happy new year in the year 2022. But there is a reason why this podcast is named New America 2045. Now, some of you may recognize this date, 2045, as a significant tipping point in American history because it will be. The date is not set in stone, although I will tell you, the research on this is conclusive, just not the date. Most research indicates it's going to happen somewhere between 2040 and 2050, so 2045 is a good midpoint. And what's going to happen by the year 2045? Well, for the very first time in American history, according to the Brookings Institute and many, many other major researchers, every researcher I could find on the topic, for the very first time in American history, America is going to be a non-white majority country. That means whites will be at about 49.7% of the population, and people of color will be 50.3% of the population. Breaking it down, Hispanics at 24.6%, blacks will be 13.1%, Asians at 7.9%, and multiracial people at 3.8%, and about 0.9% for others. So that's what this podcast is all about. We're going to be exploring that significant tipping point in our American history and the issues that are revolving and dealing with that. Now, we're not going to be talking about everything that has to do with 2045. For instance, we're not going to be discussing how much a flying car is going to cost, if we even have them by then. We're not going to be talking about how long it's going to take to get in a spaceship and go to Mars with Elon Musk or anything along those lines, or colonies on Mars, or LGBTQ issues, gender bias issues. We're really not going to be touching on that. But we are going to be exploring this significant tipping point in our demographic history. And we're going to be looking back on our race relations in the past, because as we all know, cliches are cliches for a reason. Most of the time they're true. You can't understand the future unless you understand your past. Now, we're not going to be looking back to make America great again, because anyone with any kind of open mind realizes that for too many Americans, America's past wasn't that great. But we are going to discuss ways where all Americans can be included and prosper in this transition, in this new era in American history. And we can all go through this with respect, dignity, and grace. I'm talking about a new America here. And let's hope that the majority in the future doesn't treat the minority in the future like the majority in the past treated the minority in the past. We're also not talking about replacement theory here. You hear a lot about that on Fox News and other right-wing media outlets. This is not some kind of conspiracy theory, and as you're going to see by the statistics, it doesn't have much to do with immigration. But before we get into the stats, let me give you a little bit about my background. I was born in 1966 in Washington, D.C. That kind of always freaks me out, because just the idea that I was almost born, in 1965, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, and I was almost born into a country where just by the color of my skin, by law, I would have been treated like a second-class citizen. It always kind of freaks me out, so I'm glad I dodged that bullet, just for my own peace of mind. And I do give much respect to my ancestors that had to endure that. So I'm on the cusp of being a baby boomer. The baby boomer age is 1945 to 1965. In case you don't know what a baby boomer is, that is the surge in the American population that happened after World War II, when our veterans got back in 1945. They missed their wives and their girlfriends very much, of course, and there just happened to be a baby boom. So there was a surge in population between 1945 and 1965, and of course, as the majority of the population was white, that surge in population continues to be white and continues to age. So I am on the cusp of that baby boomer age, but I don't consider myself a Gen Xer or a millennial or whatever comes after baby boomers. I am definitely more of an old school baby boomer than any kind of Gen Xer. So for most of you, I'm a peer. For some of you, I'm old enough to be your father or even your grandfather. I had 3 awesome grandsons. Only one is old enough to really pay attention to a podcast. But I'm known by many people as Uncle Mark, so I'll answer to that as well. And so I was born in D.C., and my family moved to a predominantly white neighborhood in Maryland, in the suburb of Maryland, when I was in the 3rd grade. So my very earliest memories of childhood were being in an all-black neighborhood in Washington, D.C. And that was a much different culture than the culture I experienced when I moved out to the all-white neighborhood. It was a big suburban neighborhood, and we were about one of 3 or 4 black families in that neighborhood, also surrounded by big white suburban neighborhood communities. So almost all the time, I was the only black student in my classes growing up. I went to college at Wake Forest University, got a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in politics, mostly because I've always just been fascinated with human behavior and why people do the things they do. But when I graduated, the only real way to make money with a psychology degree is to go to graduate school, and I was kind of just sick of leeching off my parents and wanted to get out and make my own money, so I decided to move out to California, and I worked in real estate sales and loan finance for a number of years, and got bored of doing that. Made some good money, but got bored of doing it. Figured out sales wasn't really for me. I kind of had like an early midlife crisis and had to kind of talk to myself, when I want to make a difference kind of speech to myself, and decided to become a teacher. And that worked out really well for me. For over 20 years, I worked in the public school system, mostly in juvenile justice system. I worked in a mental health hospital for teenagers. I worked in an adolescent substance abuse program. And that was an incredible experience. I really didn't realize until I started working in those facilities how much adversity a lot of kids have gone through at such a young age. And it kind of spurred me to write stories about their experiences for 2 reasons, really. One of which, the stories really touched me. And it was kind of a way to get that out. I had never really known people that had gone through so much adversity in their lives, and there were so many of them, mostly because their parents had been incarcerated or were strung out on drugs or neglected them or abandoned them or abused them either physically or sexually. And growing up, I didn't know all this stuff was going on, and it just kind of threw me for a loop when I started working with them and hearing about their stories. So it spurred me to write young adult novels to, one, bring an awareness to the adversity that a lot of young kids are going through at such a young age, but also to get kids that are reluctant to read more. Most of the kids that were in those facilities hadn't gone to a lot of school and hadn't done a lot of reading. But when they found out that they had a teacher that had written a novel, they were anxious to read it. And once they read my books, and they would want to read more books, and hopefully it got them on a path of reading that, hopefully would stick with them after they left the facility. But anyway, that's my writing. You can look up more about that on Mark Miller Books on Facebook. Go to the About section to read about the books, or you can buy them on Amazon Books. Just put in my name in the title of the book, and there you go. Alright, that's enough about me. Let's look at these statistics here, alright? Did you know that a segment of America's population is already majority people of color? And that is children under the age of 18. According to the U.S. Census Bureau for 2020, non-whites already account for the majority of America's 74 million children. White children are now at about 49.8%. And they're projected to be at 36.4% by the year 2060. And children of color make up 50.3% of the public school students. Between 2010 and 2018, the number of white children fell by 7.1%, while non-white children grew by 6.1%. So again, people of color under the age of 18 are already the majority, according to the U.S. Census Bureau for 2020. By 2027, they project people of color between the ages of 18 and 29 will be the majority. By 2033, between the ages of 30 and 39. By 2041, between the ages of 40 and 49. By 2050, ages 50 and 59, and by 2060, they project people of color 60 and older will be the majority due to the greater number of aging white baby boomers. Did you also know that people of color are currently in the majority in the population in 4 states in the United States of America? Right now, they're the majority in California, Texas, Hawaii, and New Mexico. And in 8 other states, people of color make up more than 40% of the population. Those states include Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, Nevada, New Jersey, and New York. Interesting. A lot of those states are undergoing those red state, blue state fights right now. Especially in Arizona, Florida, and Georgia, right? The fastest growing populations between people of color, amongst people of color, I should say, are the Asians at 46% and Latinos at 43%. And the multiracial group, even though it's only 3.9% of the population, projected to be only 3.9% by 2045, it is greatly increasing. It's one of the most rapidly increasing racial groups, multiracial. So I read an interesting article by this demographer. He's a professor of sociology at the University of New Hampshire. His name is Kenneth Johnson, and he wrote this article in 2015. And it's simply titled More Deaths at Birth, Subnational Natural Decrease in Europe and the United States. And it explains a simple fact in death. There's a natural decrease in population that occurs when deaths exceed births during a given time period. Makes total sense, right? It's not rocket science. And it's not some kind of replacement conspiracy theory. It's not immigrants lining up at the border. There's simply fewer births than deaths among white people. For example, in 2017 and 2018, there were 0.88 births for every 1 white death. So less than 1 birth for every less than 1 birth for every 1 white death. But for Latinos, there were 5 births for every 1 white death. The median age for whites in America is 43.6 compared to only 29.5 for other racial groups. So the white population, due to the baby boomer age, is just aging at a more rapid pace than people of color. 1/5 of whites are 65 or older compared to 1/10 of non-whites that are 65 or older. So with this large senior population that's going to be increasingly dependent on people of color. The white population is aging and getting older. They're going to be moving into Social Security, Medicare programs, and they're going to need to depend on the growing population of people of color to fuel those programs as we go into the future. Non-whites are going to be the source of growth in America's working age population and our tax base. So that senior population is going to be dependent on the contributions of the younger non-white citizens. People of color are going to have the most growth in voters. You know, we're going to be talking about how that's going to influence our politics and our future laws. People of color are going to have the most growth in consumers. Imagine how that's going to change culture. I mean, we already have a great influence on American culture. But how is that going to change advertising and corporations and marketing? Now, I'm not saying this to scare white people. We don't want to be like, oh no, the people of color are coming. No, it's not like that. We've always been here. We're simply seeing the natural progression of how our society should evolve. Now that all Americans are being offered the opportunity to prosper, that in previous decades was only offered to one segment of our society. You know, we're not perfect still. There's still a glass ceiling that persists for people of color and for women in too many corporations and too many organizations of influence. But we are all in this together. And we are already a great country. It's obvious to me, though, that it takes all Americans to be prosperous for the United States to remain great as we move into the year. This new America, 2045. So I thank you. That's the end of our first podcast. I plan on doing one every week. So check us out this time next week. And make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, like us, hit all the buttons, and do what you know you got to do. We're at NewAmerica2045. Leave your comments on our Facebook page, our Twitter, our TikTok. It's all NewAmerica2045. Hit us up on our email. Guess what? It's NewAmerica2045. I thank you for your time and attention, and we'll see you next time.